We're starting now. Thank you. Evening, everybody. A small test, see if everybody can hear me.
Sure can.
All right, awesome. We'll wait for more people to come in as per usual. Let's see if we have a few new questions since this afternoon. Okay. All right. Okay. We'll get started from here, I think. I had an interesting question today. I'll be dealing with that a little bit. So I'll do my little intro and then we'll kick it off from there. So welcome, everybody. Good evening. I'm TJ, specialist in highly gifted education. I'm on a mission to make gifted kids more happy, autonomous, and successful. And I thank you all for coming in and joining this question and answer session where I'll be answering questions that you guys have in the chat or that you've asked me in some of my meetings with you or you've submitted to us in the questionnaire that we send every week. And today I want to talk about basically the school-wide enrichment model by Renzulli and specifically pull outs. So because all the students in particularly help that we have, they're being pulled out of classes for very specific reasons. And I've got a lot of questions from parents asking me, say, okay, a pull out, what is it? And why do we do it? What's the point? What are we trying to achieve with it? And what can we do to make sure that these pull outs function the way that they're intended to? And then I think from there, we'll go a little bit into the history from it, and I'll tell a bit of a story about where our version of the pullout came from and how we've been able to use it with different age groups across the board. And hopefully you'll be able to use that information to support your kids at home. So we'll start off with the school-wide enrichment model, also known as Renzulli's SCM, as you can see. Now, Renzulli is quite a renowned scholar in highly gifted education. He's been doing this for a bunch of decades, published lots of different articles in different parts of the world. He is really well known for having a good look at the K-12 system in the United States and having had a big impact on how gifted and talented education in America has evolved specifically. And his school-wide enrichment model is based on lots of scholarly articles, lots of longitudinal research that is done, where he said, okay, when we approach gifted education in a school, we need to not just take them out of their school and have like a simple thing outside of it. We need to look at the whole system. And in order for him, what he mentioned, what he argued for, he said, well, actually, all these things need to sort of work together. And one of the three things that are very key in his model is that he has three types of enrichments, essentially, that we use. Now, enrichment, of course, is something that you've heard probably in a lot of your schools being mentioned, like enrichment classes and so forth. And nowadays that's becoming a little bit more standard in most education, like K-12 as well as IGCSE or even IB. But the actual term, the phrase, comes from gifted education. So what are the different types? So the first type that he talks about is exposure. Now, exposure specifically in with gifted kids has to do with finding meaning, right? So a lot of gifted kids struggle with school because they have the ability to make lots of connections in their brain and they can see very far. And we kind of have a bad habit of not telling our kids why they need to learn things. This starts very early. Like we don't want kids to get hurt, so we tell them just don't touch the stove. And like that seems very logical to us because we know it can burn us. But if you're new to stoves, you've never seen them before, and they are told you're not allowed to touch this, why? And like, tell me why. And a lot of parents that have gifted kids, they say, yeah, they keep asking why. They keep going further, and the need for that understanding is important. And he said the way that you solve that particular drive is by making sure there's more exposure. And what he means with this is like, do more things that relate to the real world. Now, what we do in Passend with almost all of our kids is we actually try to go on trips quite frequently as a kickoff to a module when we want to get the kids involved, and that is one way to get exposure going. So for example, we did an arc a while back about space. So in order to kick that off, we went to a museum specifically about space, and that allowed the kids to see, oh, there's more to this. And then we said, okay, we're going to do projects and little experiments that are interactive versions of what you've seen in these museums. And as a result, when they started working on their actual projects, they were much more involved. So but exposure can also be basically applied versions of something. So what we tend to see in a lot of school systems right now that are trying to implement this is that they'll have like a little kickoff where it's kind of clear, like, okay, if I'm doing math, like what is this used for, and what can you do with this? And one trick that we teach teachers that we work with is to basically look for things in real life, let them bring it back, and then figure out what we can do to help them. So that's the first one, exposure. That's an important step. The second step is skill building, right? So, and this is getting better and better and better as international schools evolve. But very traditional schooling types tend to be very focused on what we call rote learning. So basically, ready knowledge and being able to regurgitate what stuff you've learned. But skill building is a little bit more specific. So it's really about like learning how to code, for example, or learning how to cook. Like today, for example, we brought the kids to get ready for camp, and in camp we're going to be cooking for 110 people with the kids. So that's quite a difficult challenge. Like cooking for 5 people at home can be hard, as everybody knows. So doing it like almost in this McDonald's kind of style where you have to set up stations and everybody has their job and all that kind of stuff. And the kids had to think about that themselves, and then they have to think about how big the portions need to be, and so on. So again, it's exposure to a lot of things where we say, okay, we want to have this one dish. We want to make it for 110. So make a small version of it first. See how many people you can feed with this. Now calculate what you need to do to actually make that work for 110 people. That's both a bit of exposure, but it's also a lot of skill building in there, because they have to start thinking about projects in a wider scale. And then the cooking itself, of course, has a massive amount of skill building in it. Now, gifted kids tend to have they develop asynchronously when it comes to like motor skills and stuff. That has a lot to do with how their brains function. So their brains tend to go quicker than their hands can keep up. And as a result, because thinking about things and coming up with solutions is much faster than actually tinkering with stuff and trying to make it work sometimes. So what we tend to see is that their motor skills sometimes develop a little bit poorly. So we have to come up with more intricate ways that basically build those kind of skills up. For another example of this is we started doing some paper mache stuff with the kids, which is kind of like in that art region, of course, where you normally expect that to happen. But it was kind of surprising to see that even for the kids that are in year 5 or 6, they had a lot of challenge getting these things to work. So skill building is really important, and nowadays that moves more and more into the digital age of things. So I'm right now with one of the kids that we're working, like we're asking him to actually think about, okay, well, how do you work with an LLM? How do you build a GPT out of that? How do you then make that into an agent? How do you go further? So there's very specific skills that child wanted to work on. And at the same time, we have other kids that say, okay, well, I want to learn how to cast resin to make a mold, and then use that to make a model of a singularity, which again is a very different kind of skill. So it's still incorporating a lot of that cerebral thinking that a lot of gifted kids want to work with, but we really need to help them understand, like almost like a D&T kind of mindset, an engineering kind of mindset, how to formalize things into physical things that you can then use to solve problems a bit better. And the last one, the type 3 enrichment, is smaller groups, even up to the level of individuals, and then investigation. And this is like the work of Renzulli goes back to 1990s already, so it's quite a while back. But nowadays, the new craze, and particularly in IB schools, is about around like, student-centered learning. Which obviously, when we have small groups, individual, that's very student-centered. And problem-based learning. Now, for those that don't know what problem-based learning is where you just say, okay, here's a problem. Like and the example of the cooking we did today is really good. It's like we have the problem that we have to feed 110 people 2 weeks from now at camp. The problem is that we will not have access to an amazing kitchen like we have in some of the international schools. We need to bring everything. So if you need a spoon to taste, you need to bring it. If it's not there, tough luck. We need to figure it out, right? So and rather than us saying this is a list, fill it in, we just say, okay, at camp we're going to be cooking for 110 people. It needs to be within this budget. Go and fix it. Go and solve it. And we don't even tell them what we're going to cook. They decide what they're going to cook. They're going to decide based on what they can bring to camp, what kind of facilities there are, whether it fits in the budget. And all of a sudden, everybody has to break down into smaller groups and have to start thinking about, okay, well, we need a dessert. Okay, we need a main course. We need a side dish. We need an appetizer. Okay, and then we need to stay within a budget of a certain amount because we're going to try and sell it to the parents. And then you use that to raise money for charity. So we can make it super fancy and enjoy the food with our parents, or we can try to make sure that we don't make it too expensive and we can raise more money for charity. Which one of the two? What is the balance that we have to do? Now, that is something that in gifted and talented education has been happening for years. But a lot of schools are starting to move towards that style of education because it gives a lot of the level 1 and 2 um, like enrichment embedded in it. So when you get to level, you can't really get to level 3 without doing level 1 and 2 first. So that is, and there's a lot more technical stuff that I can probably spend hours talking about. But basically, for the framework for today, I think it's important to know that like basically from 1990s onwards up until like 2010 is his last article on this. Basically, Renzulli has been advocating for all these things and been quite successful in that, so that like we now have pull-out sessions for enrichment for non-gifted kids as well. So his work has been very important. Now, there's a few other scholars that are really, really key. So Renzulli we just had, but Van Tassel-Baksa is also a very big proponent of particularly pullouts. So let's define pullouts a little bit first, because what is a pullout? Well, in most enrichment classes, as we know them in Malaysia specifically, are run after school. So they're almost always like CCAs or like weekends, and they're like and people spend quite a lot of money on these particular things. So the extra tuition, I would actually say that enrichment can be tuition as well if you have a good enrichment teacher. But there's CCA things like cooking CCAs, or there is like science CCAs and robotic CCAs, and all these things are great tools, and they in a sense they hark back to that level 1 and then level 2. But I really find that like there's a big difference between something that is done outside of school as an add-on and something that gets done as an actual replacement of actual classes. Now, Van Tassel-Baksa, actually, her argument about all this is really strong, and she's done years of research on this specifically. And what she says is that pullouts they are needed, like not a luxury. right? So she says, basically, when it comes to gifted individuals, this is a must. Like if we don't do it, we really risk the academic performance of these kids long term. And that is really key, because she's done quite a lot of research on this, and her colleague Hogeveen, Professor Hogeveen, has done similar longitudinal research on the effect of this, and they come to the same conclusions. And there's quite a lot of other scholars as well that go really into depth on this. But basically, what she's saying, it's like, okay, if you don't do this, we will have difficulty. Now, one of the things that that a lot of people tend to think with gifted kids is like, okay, well, there's other ways than pulling out, right? Like if I take them out of class, like what does that mean then? It's like why do you do it? Because again, like pull out to me means you take them out of a class setting for about 1.5 to 3 hours a week, once a week, and that is basically what Van Tassel Baxa says is the kind of the key amount of time that they need to sort of get the attention that they need. So one of the biggest challenges with gifted kids is that they have a lot more questions about things that they want to learn. They want to have a lot more understanding. They need a lot more. They need a lot more of this type 1, 2, and 3 enrichment, and not all teachers are set up to be able to do this, because it takes a lot of time, right? So if you're looking at a classroom that is basically trying to accommodate the bell curve, like, and our gifted kids sit here and at 2.5% of the actual population, like the stuff that they need at this stage here really often goes completely opposite of what all the other kids need in this particular stage. So as a teacher, it's like, okay, well, that seems unfair. Like I cannot make accommodations to this 2.5%, and then compromise what I need to do for the other kids. And then don't forget, on the other side here, we often have the SEN kids as well, right? So this is so basically, like a lot of times these kids are sort of taken out and said, okay, I'll focus exclusively on anybody in this particular area as a teacher. Now, there's a lot of advocates that say that should not happen. You should do all of it in the same classroom. There's unfortunately enough evidence right now, and then a very recent article from only 2 years ago. The research is 2 years ago. It got published like literally like a couple of months back, where it's very clear that like asking teachers to basically say, okay, do everything for that full 100% is almost impossible. It's too much expertise. It's too much practice. Like even the most skilled teachers really struggle with it, and the effective outcome for everybody is worse, right? So now that doesn't mean that we have to take these kids completely out of the situation, because that is also not good. And this is why pullouts are kind of like a hybrid model, and that's where things become a little bit more fair. And in the pullouts itself, what we tend to do, or we try to do, is help kids cope with the normal class. Basically, that's where we're aiming for. Um, Okay, so that's what Van Tassel Baxa says. Like, okay, so there's a few key advantages that Van Tassel Baxa runs into. So when you pull out for the 3 hours, a few things happen. First of all, let me see. Here we go. Why did that not right? Yeah, one. Okay, so it allows us to give some advanced reading materials and writing materials, right? Reading plus writing. And obviously, this is very subjective to the group that you have. But generally speaking, when we work with the kids, we try to give them materials that is about like a year above their ability. And again, this depends on each individual child. So if they're strong at English and math, then we give them stuff that's a little bit higher, goes a little bit further. It was very interesting. There was an event going on in one of the schools that I'm working at, and it was aimed at the A levels, year 12 and 13, and they got like a university coming in, and they were asking them to build like almost like a team building kind of thing, like a bridge out of paper. And we have done the exact same exercises with kids in year 5 and 6. So you can see that, like, even though some of these things are obviously about like critical thinking and collaboration and so on, the stuff that we're doing with them is often a couple of years ahead. Right. And then the same when we're asking them to write, for example, a very good example is that we asked the kids to make to pick a scientist, and then they had to write 500 words about that scientist. Which and this is for primary, lower and upper primary. Like the word counts changes slightly based on what the kids are doing. But that was a quite advanced writing request, because we told them, go find like a scientist you like. So they end up reading about 5 or 6 different scientists, and then they have to pick the one that they like, go even deeper in it, and then actually write about that person, right? So the advanced reading is kind of important. Now the next thing you can do is analytical skills. So when you see most curriculum materials, they tend to be quite on rails. Like, one of the things that is a very important part of education is what we call scaffolding. So the idea is that you start relatively simple, and then you build your way up towards a solution where you want them to combine it all. And that scaffolding is often very slow and quite methodical, right? So you tend to see some kids, when you're trying to scaffold for them, they just don't get it. And it's almost like their brain works in a slightly different way. And that's not unique to gifted kids, of course, but also with other kids. It's like, but when you have your curriculum material like this, sometimes that can create a lot of friction and makes it hard for the teachers to do things. And analyzing the scaffolding or analyzing the things that need to happen is kind of limited in those particular settings, because you have 24 kids, right? So you need to ask coaching kind of questions and not give them answer almost immediately. So this is where pullouts are really, really important. Now, Van Tassel-Baxter also says the inquiry-based learning is really important. So this Van Tassel-Baxter is like 2008 is the original article that she started talking about this, but the latest one, 2017 and 2000 and like just prior to COVID, like 2019, basically keep saying the same thing. So like what we tend to see with a lot of these scholars is they start off with like this great idea, and then they research it, and then their later articles are them defending it against people, because there seems to be always a bit of like almost like a wave going on where people say, oh, yeah, we need to do this, and then it just wanes down. And Lianne Hogeveen, who is very much focused on the well-being part of all of this, she says, like, yeah, it's like the last 20 years has been me doing the same work over and over again. And now when I see certain articles pop up, I start my work earlier, because it means I can stop that pendulum from swinging. And yeah, so basically the inquiry-based learning is something that keeps coming back. We're now at a big step where everybody says, yes, let's do this. And I'm sure 5-10 years from now, we'll have like somebody say, no, we need to go back to rally knowledge a little bit more. So these are natural flows that we see in education. And unfortunately for our gifted kids, they tend to go a little bit against all of these. So we have to be mindful that like what sometimes works for mainstream kids really doesn't work for gifted kids. Now, the last thing that Van Tassel-Baxter says is like conceptual frameworks, like concepts and frameworks. And what she means, this is stuff that is normally reserved for older students. So when you talk about like learning a simple skill in math, often the context of it is kind of gone. And again, it harks back to that need of like bigger context. But basically you say, okay, let's take things a little bit further. So here's a problem. Let's see if you can bite into it first. Then if you need more help, we give you frameworks that you can use to actually study and work on this. And again, this is where the pull out is so important, because the real question that I often get with pull outs is like, well, like, is it okay to miss class? And the answer that I give is like, well, it's not, is it missing class, or is it actually putting out fires? And I'll give you a story around this, because we had one girl that basically struggled a little bit with the pull out because she was being pulled out of Bahasa, and as part of when we pull out in help in particular, we start off with a few things. So we start off with a learning contract, and that sounds very official, but the thing is, we don't have grades in the differentiated learning programs and the gifted and talented programs, particularly because we don't want that closed mindset build to happen. So if we have no grades, it can feel sometimes like, well, that means I don't have to do anything, right? Because what is the point? So the learning contracts are kind of important to help them frame the idea that joining this class is a choice. They do sign into certain behavioral standards that we're looking for. So these contracts don't ask you, we want you to have an A in math. We'll talk about, okay, what are the things that you normally procrastinate with or that you have difficulties with? And our assessments with these kids, we know these. So if they come in and they say, Jon, I have no assessment, I have no problems with this, but we've seen that they have perfectionism. We'll coach them towards like, okay, well, like, how about this? Like in the assessment, this is what you said. And then like 99% of the time, they'll be open and honest. Yeah, that's right. Like that's something I need to work on. So we start off with a learning contract. That is really important. And the other reason why that is important is because the learning contract talks about behavior, but it also talks about how the pullouts work. So, and this is a bit different for secondary and primary. Like in secondary, the kids get a lot of choice, like extremely a big amount of choice in what they can be pulled out of, and then they have to really negotiate what stuff they have to do and not do. But in the pull outs, basically, there's a little bit of doing the classwork, and the teachers will be told like to be careful not to give them too much busy work, generally speaking. But the idea is we're trying to get these kids to become a little bit more self-sufficient or autonomous, right? So that's the second part of where we're going towards. So when they pull out, it's not like, okay, I'm missing Bahasa. No, they have to sign with us a contract that says you have to behave in a certain way, or you choose the behaviors that you want to display, and then we will keep you to it. Right. So there's quite a few. There's a little bit of lines in there that they can fill in, and then they sign it, and then it's official. The pullouts basically talk about how much extra work, like, do they have to do the CAs or not? Depends a little bit on what age group they're in. Year 1 to 3, of course, there's almost none of this yet. But if it's year 4, 5, and 6, then there might be some things that they have to do. So they'll get like worksheets and things like that, just to show that they're keeping up. And then we will accommodate that in the class. Now, in this particular girl situation, she joined her classes like extremely happy, like participating really well, enjoying herself, and actually is learning quite a lot. Particularly a little bit more about like how to constructively join into group work and things like that, because that's one of the other things that pullouts do. They really put them into a peer class with kids with similar kind of thoughts. So basically she seemed to be doing fine, but then she got extra work. So she had to do like about 1 or 2 worksheets every, and those are like small, but it's not that much work. She can probably do this in 5 to 10 minutes if she really wanted to. But basically, she would get this, teacher would give it to her. She was responsible for finishing that herself, and she could choose to do it in our sessions, or she could choose to do it at home. Like the agency to when you want to work, that basically learning when to work on things is also a skill. Basically, in a lot of IGCSE systems, when they go from primary to secondary, and they go from 0 homework to quite a lot of homework all of a sudden, or at least a lot of requirements to study and get ready for things, is kind of a big leap. So us saying, hey, here's a little bit of that work and you get to decide when you do it, is both giving them agency, but also a little bit of responsibility of coming up with finishing these tasks. Now, what happened with this girl, though, is that she took these and she put them in her locker. And she didn't do them, which wasn't obviously the points of all of that, and that you don't immediately see this. It normally takes 1 or 2 weeks before that normally comes back as a bit of a challenge. So in her situation, she had a bit of a stack of these things in her locker room, and then obviously the first tendency is to go, oh, she's just not doing what she's supposed to do. She's avoiding or anything else. And like that kind of judgment is very snappy. And I think when you've never had that kind of responsibility before, kind of unfair. We did a whole session a couple of weeks back about like how procrastination often is a fear response. So it could well be that she's. So we don't really know yet. Like that's the thing. Like we're meeting her tomorrow to have a chat about it, basically to let her tell us what is going on. Because one of the things we want to try and avoid in this situation, particularly as parents, as educators, is that she feels, oh man, I've just got extra work. I don't want to do this anymore. Because this particular habit of procrastinating is really the thing that we are trying to prevent from happening when she's 16 and doing her exams. Like the basically the term that is really important, putting out fires, the fires that lead to what we call gifted burnouts, which is maybe a very fitting name. So this is when the kids didn't learn to study and take their own time into management into their hands. And as a result, when the exams come, they procrastinate to the end, and then unfortunately, they sort of burn out. So they shut down, and that can show up in lots of different ways. But it's one of the reasons why a lot of gifted kids, they tend to, when you have a bit of a performance curve, they tend to go very high and then they sort of stagnate. And other kids, they're normally performing a little bit below this, but as they get better and better at learning, there's this point where the other kids overtake them. And this is when we see the burnout happen, right? So, and then this correction to kind of back to here, that's like, this is maybe 16 years in, right? So there's like 12 years of experience that the other kids have that is really hard to catch up in that short amount of time. So when we do these pull-outs and we see some of that work not being done, the fact that like this girl has only been with us a couple of weeks, the fact that we managed to find that out in like 1 or 2 weeks because of communications from the parents was a very important part in this. Is the parents say, hey, like I heard that some of these sheets aren't done. What's going on? Now that meant that we only had to deal with about 2 weeks worth of sheets that we had to worry about rather than more, for example, right? So it is very important that we know that the teachers give the kids the extra work. It's very important that we know from the parents that maybe the sheets aren't done fully, or if they're done at the last moment. So these are the kind of bits of information that we need so that we can sit down with her and say, okay, well, what's going on? Because what we're trying to do is we're actually trying to get those hidden behaviors that she's now showing to show up earlier in a developmental stage, which is now like primary, because that means that basically she will run into a little bit of that frustration maybe earlier, maybe here, and then we still have an opportunity to correct and basically keep going above that curve, right? So so that's the aim of the actual pullout. Now, how does that work though? Like how do you get a class with so many different kids and so many different challenges to work? Because like one wants to do science, one wants to do something else, and like that seems kind of impossible. And actually, there is some versions of this. So I'll talk a bit about the one that Professor Hogeveen um, did. And so what she came up with is what we call the revolving door model. So the revolving door model is one where the students basically get a choice to pick a subject and then say, okay, I'm going to go in and I'm going to take the bits that I want to learn from that subject, and I'm going to prove that I know it. And then I'm going to sort of revolve out again, and then I'm going to work on my own thing somewhere else. Now we're trying to basically get that going with the secondary kids. So the way that works is that we start off with a contract. They choose their pullouts, and then based on the pullout, they have to do a pretest. Now, the pretest can be an actual test, a mock exam, or anything else. It could be a CA that the teachers have prepared that they can then use to assess where they are. Some cases they could be a project that the teacher wants them to do. Show me you can do this first, then I'm quite happy to do it. So it really depends on what kind of subject they choose, right? So if you choose music, they technically can say, you know what, I can already do this. Can I play a piece for you? And that could be the pretest, for example, and that could be more than enough for a teacher to say, yeah, I can see that you know what you need to know. So for this term, you're allowed to work on something different. You can, but then the teacher can still say, look, I still want you to have some music involved. And some teachers are like, nah, okay, you do whatever you want. It's fine. We're happy where you are. And if you see a little bit of a drop in some stuff, then next term you need to, if you choose this again, you need to do some of the work. You need to catch up. Now, this is again reason why we need to want to do this as early as possible, because when we obviously do these things when they're 16 years old, the impact on their grades is a little bit higher. Right? Because, like, unfortunately, the way that IGCSE and IB work is that in that stage, what they do, we need to keep track of. Right? So the earlier we do this, the more important it is. And as parents, when you see the kids struggle with this, know that this is actually the struggle that we're trying to simulate in a way, so that when the struggles come when they're 16, they know what's coming. That's the key bit here. So the revolving door essentially starts off with kids coming in and doing one subject with us. But if things go really well, they can start doing this with other subjects too. So they can start doing it on their own. And then in some of my A-level students that have been now with me for 2 years, they're like, okay, you know what? I've gone to this particular teacher. I've done a pretest with them, even though they didn't really book a slot with us. They come sit with us in the differentiated learning system, and then they go study their own thing, or they get a little bit more extra time for the other projects that they're working on. And that really creates they sort of start going in and out of these classes as and when as they need them. Now, that obviously is a really good preparation for when they go to university, because that is one of the best ways you can use university. Like, a very famous person that did this was Steve Jobs. He famously never graduated from the university he was in. There's a few other very famous people in line with this. One being Reese Witherspoon, who dropped out of Harvard. And Matt Damon was one too. He sort of made a whole movie about it. So if you guys remember Good Will Hunting, there's a lot of stuff in there that is related to his own way of thinking. So these kind of gifted individuals, they took what they needed from those schools and then decided, no, I'm okay with this. The thing that I want to do is that, because they wouldn't have had the kind of support that the kids I work with get from us, is that they will still push through and finish the school a little bit, so that you can have both that ability to pick and choose the things that you need to really develop yourself against your own ambitions and against your own needs. But at the same time, not kick the system too much to say, okay, I'm kind of done with it and I'm going to prove something else, right? So, and I want those choices to be very understood by those kids, so that they make these choices consciously, and not as a response to, like, you know what, I didn't like this, or like, because obviously when you look at interviews of these particular people, they tend to be very disillusioned with how that went, because they were often not really allowed to do things. And I think like today I was sitting with one of the A-level students, and he wants to go to Cambridge. He's very dead set on this, and he basically says, okay, like, what can we do? And he still has like a good 1.5 years to go, right? So I said, okay, well, I mean, what do you want to do in Cambridge? He said, I want to do academic research. I said, okay, like, now he's being pulled out of physics. So if you're being pulled out of physics, like, what can you do that aligns? And basically he said, well, I want to do something with robotics, and specifically with like, he wants to see if he can make hands, like a robotic hand work, and then particularly with strength, and like, there's a lot of like intricate details in that make that an interesting project. And he said there's a particular scholar, like a professor in Cambridge that I want to do stuff with. So we just went and said, okay, well, like, what are the topics for this particular term? How can we weave them in? And what are the things that that particular scholar is writing about? So why don't we do some research? Why don't we go find some of his articles of the professor that you want to work under, and dig deeper. What questions is he asking right now? Or in this case, actually, what is she asking right now that are relevant to what you want to learn? And then I told him, like, you know what, why not like write to this particular professor and ask what she's doing and what kind of things, like what she means with certain things you don't understand, or even simply you could ask for particular articles that are maybe a bit hard for you to get. um, and I told him this, and I spoke to him. That was like 2 weeks ago, and I spoke to him today, and he had done that with 4 different professors on his own. So he's like, "Yeah, no, actually, this was interesting. This was interesting. These guys didn't quite seem to see eye to eye." And so he sent out a bunch of emails to people at Cambridge and other universities to ask for scholarly articles. And in the meantime, like the stuff sometimes he didn't quite get some things that he was writing about. And I happen to know that that happened to be part of some of the curriculum materials. And why don't you just grab your book and then read through that and make that work? And he was like more than happy to do that. And yeah, he would go through a chapter like that in like half an hour, get what he needs, and then he would continue. So you've taken him out of physics, and you would argue like, oh, there's some stuff that he needs to learn. But he's why are we in physics in the first place? Well, because there's an opportunity for him eventually to go to a university related to it. But what we've been doing in that pull out with him is so much more further than that. Like, and one point, like he saw that I was working on a conference with another teacher um, around giftedness, and he said, "Oh, that's interesting. Like how do you guys get these speakers?" And I said, "Well, you just invite them." He said, "Oh, could we do something with that maybe next year?" And that would be the plan, to see if we can maybe get some scholars from different places to come over. And whether that is something that we can immediately get off the ground with this group yet, I'm not sure yet. But this shows the kind of flexibility and lateral thinking that you can apply in these kind of pullouts, and how they can really impact kids positively. So they learn deeper, they go further. But the kids that are currently writing scholarly articles, because it's kind of a common thing, they go like, oh, can I do that? So, yeah, sure. Like, I'll teach you how to do APA referencing. I'll teach you how to search the internet for references and articles, and I'll show you how to use library resources to get the articles that you need. And then what you see is that when these kids start engaging with this material, the first thing that they come back with is, oh, this is a lot harder than I thought it was, which is great. And then they go, wow, I didn't realize that all that stuff I'm doing for English actually has a purpose. I don't always envy our English teachers, because when they start doing IGCC level or A level English, a lot of the students go, what am I doing? What is the point? I don't understand why we're writing in this way. Like, why we're so and like, you use the better word, like difficult about certain words. Like the phrasing they use is a lot more colorful, to be honest. Like particularly after a CA that didn't quite go as well as they wanted. But yeah, like that realization, like, oh, there is a purpose to this. Like, why is this English so different? And when they then start reading these articles and they go, oh yeah, okay, I can understand what this is, and I need to rewrite my entire article like 3 or 4 times to get the language in and get the continuation of particular information in there more readily. And that's fun, but it's frustrating, right? Because like rewriting something you've already written is not something a lot of kids do. And I have some of the articles that the kids are writing that have rewritten it like 5 times easily. The idea with that is that we teach them how to deal with that. Like, so how does that feel? Like, what does happen? Like, why do you run into these particular things where people go one way, then they go the other way? A little bit of the politics around it. Like, obviously the world changes while you're writing an article. Some of these articles can take years to write, right? So if you're writing something today about like class behavior, and you started your research 2 years ago, the impact of stuff that has happened in Malaysia would maybe need you to change things that you already wrote down. Sometimes revelations change what you need to. But a big thing that they run into, these kids, is that they realize, oh, none of them agree on each other. with each other, and that is first frustrating and then kind of funny, and then it's like, oh, then what can I do to make that work? Right. So this is a bit of an idea of from the depending on like whether in primary to secondary, A levels, like what a pullout tends to do. Like where do we go with this particular kind of system? Like it's because you need to be able to really change your learning around what you need. And I think when we get to like what can we do at home to help with this, because we get a lot of pushback from parents that are a bit worried, like, okay, they're going to miss a class, so that is not acceptable and that's problematic. But the good news is that for almost all the kids that we work with that actually are allowed that kind of freedom, that actually work within the boundaries that we give them within the contract, the other extra work they need to do, because it's extra work, don't get me wrong, eh? Like if they're being pulled out of out of a class, they have to do harder work. So it's not an easy ride. It's definitely not like, oh, I'm going to miss a class. So what we need to do is we need to give him a little bit of trust. So the stuff at home that actually I'm trying to advocate for. So home tips for pullout, right? Is trust the system. And I know that that it's like, okay, but TJ, I should just trust you, that's it. So well, today I was trying to show you that there's been over the years a lot of scholars that basically say, look, we've done really long-term research on the academic impacts of these kids, because almost all these studies look at like, okay, what were the grades before, what were the grades after, what are the success factors afterwards, like how much more money did they make and things like that. These studies go quite deep into the actual impacts on these kids academically and career-wise. So particularly Renzulli and Van Tassel are focused on that a lot. There's QnA, who's even more focused on the outcome. He used to work with a lot of CEOs and stuff, so he has a very big view into how that should work. And then and Lianne Hogeveen is very focused on the well-being, so the mental well-being. So it comes more from a psychological side, whereas like QnA comes from a bit of a economic side, for example. And in all of those, it actually works. So trust the system a bit, right? And then this is also very important, right? Trust the kids. So I can't say this enough, but whenever I ask any of the children what they really want to achieve out of this, all of them want to achieve more than what their parents are asking for from them. But where things get a little bit off the rails is when they don't get the agency to choose it on their own terms, right? So that's where the anxiety comes from, and we want our kids to do well, like, and that's very normal. But you'd be surprised if you give your kids a little bit of trust that they actually want more than you think, even though sometimes when you ask them straight up, they will say, "Nah, I don't want that." Right, like because they'll say it just to get you off their backs, or to annoy you because they're still teens, right? So there is that, but we need to trust the kids. But right, trust but verify, right? So what I mean with that is that like check with the teachers. So um, this depends a little bit on whether I mean, some of us I know have kids with both ADHD and so on. So they have a little bit of a challenge there. Particularly the ones gifted kids can have a bit of a difficulty with executive functioning part of like what is the more important thing to do. So we trust them. They often want it for the right reason. Sometimes, particularly the younger kids, are not capable of making the right decisions yet on what stuff to do first. Right. So if they do get some extra homework, they might not do it because they think other things are more important. They might generally just forget about it. Like, so that girl that put the stuff in the locker, we're going to find out tomorrow whether she put them there on purpose or that whether she just forgot them, because I know she forgets her water bottle just as many times, right? So like there's a lot of reasons why that can go wrong, and that's like if it's because she just forgot about them, we have an opportunity to sit down. Okay, well, what is a ritual that you could have before you leave class to make sure this happens, right? So you need to check in with teachers. check with teachers, with like what they have to do. And you don't have to make that a secret thing. You just say, particularly if they're a little bit forgetful, you say, hey, like you have an issue that you sometimes forget things. Would you mind if we make a WhatsApp group with the teacher, or like a Google Classroom specifically for the three of us, where if I have an assignment that you have an assignment that you need to do, there you go. So check with the teachers. And then also, check the if it's done, right? Now, obviously, this can be kind of a tricky one. Like you come in and you say, okay, just I don't trust you, that's it. But you can actually create situations where maybe you can do things, you can naturally check if it's gone. So if it's done. So you could say, okay, let's have a rule that we work together on our homework to like in a particular space in the house. One of the things is, if you like, a lot of teens end up doing their homework in their room. Obviously, it's hard to see what they do over there. And even if what they think is doing the right thing, which is studying, they could still get stuck. So if you get them to basically do their homework or their preparation in a bit more communal area, not only do you have an opportunity to observe them, whether they're actually doing what they need to do, you can also create a bit more of an environment in the house where it's kind of more important. So particularly if you have siblings, so if you have a teen that is doing exams, and you're sitting them in the room where everybody's supposed to be, basically giving them a little bit more attention at that time. So when they're stuck, or even when it's just mental support, will model a lot of good behavior to the other kids. So there's a good opportunity for you to actually show that, hey, you know what, it's exam time. This is an important time to be punctual when it comes to eating and making sure that everything is done, and that the house is not a chaotic mess around them. And I'll be honest, like it's not just always the siblings that do this. Sometimes there's parents that don't necessarily make things easier for the kids in that situation too, right? So and that's one of the opportunities. So you verify specifically by either letting them work where they are, or like if there's been situations where they did forget something, say, hey, frame it slightly different. We say, no, sometimes you forget things. Do you want help with that? They'll almost always say yes. I say, okay, well, what does that look like? Probably, checking my work. And I've done it with a few kids where, I mean, obviously, when they've just forgotten the work, they're just as frustrated and angry about it as you, as a parent, potentially. And then if you then go, it's like, oh, okay, I'm going to check your work from now on, you've turned it into a punishment. So something that is actually kind of a positive thing, which is I'm here to spend some time with you and give you support with something that is difficult. Instead, you turn it into it's punishment because you haven't done the thing that you're supposed to do. Now, where that really gets frustrating is if they didn't do it on purpose, right? So if they didn't do the procrastination on purpose, it's just a fear response because they were overwhelmed, it was too hard, whatever that is. Then it's like they're already beating themselves up over it, and then here you come in and say, don't do this, I don't trust you anymore. It's just a recipe for disaster, even though like it's very easy to say, okay, let's take a step back, try to do this well before. So we've got mocks coming up in for anybody with the exam kits. Basically, we have one more week in school, and then there's a couple of weeks where they can start preparing for mocks. Now, mocks, depending on whether you are in A levels or whether you are in IGCSE, have different meanings. Also depends on what you want to do afterwards. Like, I mean, if you don't really know what you're going to do afterwards with it, and you're lucky enough in a school that has like A levels as a through school, your mocks aren't that important. They're really in terms of like what the grades need to be. Because you'll probably be able to enroll into those programs regardless. So the only important grades are the actual IGCSEs at that point. But for some schools, mocks are used as predictive grades for other things. And that makes it so that like there's a little bit more pressure on them. So depending on which one of the two it is, you need to give them a little bit of an opportunity to adjust. So ideally, there's not that much pressure on them yet. Because we're dealing with the IGCSE exams, maybe in the year 10 versions of it. So in those situations, a great opportunity to practice being empathic with your help in advance, and maybe start talking to them this weekend or next week, and then create a bit of a situation where they're ready for it. So you tell them, look, I want to talk to you about your preparation for your exams. Now, can we talk about that? I don't know, 2 days from now, and then we'll go somewhere. I want to go shopping. Want to take you with me? Let's grab a coffee and talk about it. That frames the whole thing quite differently, because you're basically bringing them into an kind of a neutral area. So that's great, because at home, obviously, particularly if you have kids that you fight with a lot, there's a lot of baggage there. So you say, hey, I find this is important enough. I want to spend some time with you. We're going to sit down. We're going to talk about it. And then the questions you ask is, what things do you need help with? What are things that you need? Our job right now with the pullouts for the exam kids is to teach them how to ask you for those kind of skills. And an example of that is, like, for one of the kids that I've been working with in A levels, she needed another hour of study time. Um, but the way that her parents were picking her up from school and when they would eat, which was like sort of kind of wishy-washy and everything else, made it so that she didn't have a reliable hour of actual deep work time available to her. And then obviously if you extrapolate that over 7 days, that's 7 hours a week. And she had like 4 weeks to go for an exam. So that's a lot of studies that she can't get done. So I worked with her on how to look at the schedule, like be fair, be mindful of what she could do. And she said, like, yeah, like my mom sometimes struggles getting the food ready because the kitchen is a mess. I say, well, is there a way for you to help out with that? So yeah, I mean, I can maybe like both encourage my siblings to do this a little bit more, and I can maybe just help clean up when I come back from school. It's like, sounds like a good plan. Like, because now you've created a situation where, and you can be a bit more productive in school, and then you can say, "Mom, I need basically to eat like a half hour early so that I can spend an actual full hour worth of deep work after dinner." And then obviously we spoke to the parents about that. So there might be a situation where she's going to ask this. Um, I mean, it's up to you to decide how you want to deal with that as a parent. It's like, it's not my job to tell you this is when you need to eat. But what is very interesting is that, like, in that situation, I really feel that bond between the mom and the daughter there became a lot better. And as a result, she's much more punctual, but other stuff too. Right now, she's starting to do more exercise and things like that as well, to get her to be able to sleep earlier, so she can get up an hour earlier and basically not sleep in the car and do some work there too. And so, like these kind of situations are not always just the child not doing what they want, and we basically really we need to help them with their schedules. And that could be hard because I know everybody here is hardworking parents, and I'm sure that you might feel like, hey, you need to be able to do this themselves, or they need to be able to do this themselves. But a little bit of help here can really build that relationship. So I think that's enough for today. Are there any other questions? Maybe pressing questions in the chat or live that you guys want to ask me? Then still give you a little bit of an opportunity. And if not, I'm going to wish you all a very good evening again. Thank you all for signing in. Next week we won't have one because we're going out for camp, and the night before is going to be hectic for us. So we'll have a slight break next week. But yeah, I thank you all. Have a great evening, and hope to see you all very soon.